A button up the top.
Yep. US screen sharing. I think it's recording. Yeah,
It'll
it's
be in Zoom itself.
yeah. When I started sharing, it had the three buttons for more. So
Okay.
then I went to recording, and now it says pause or stop recording. So it is.
Okay, so that means it is recording.
Yep.
It gets very complicated, doesn't it?
Yes, sometimes
Technology, we think it makes life easier, but it actually adds levels
it's
of complication.
like bureaucracy. You go to like renew your license, and it's just more things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we won't even talk about AI and possibilities there.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So you've read the scenario, you're aware of the school.
Yes,
Um,
79% L Labote,
yeah.
but that's just
Um,
for the one specific question, right? The
yes, it is. That's right.
yeah,
Yep.
4 and 5, I'm pretty sure.
Um, and you're also aware that you've got to upload the link through Turnitin
The
in
vi
the assessment
videos or
tab.
I've got to upload the slides and then the video once it's finished recording.
Yes, that's right. That's
Yep.
correct. Through there's a second tab in Turnitin in the assessment panel for the link to the recording. So you upload that there. Just thought I'd double check so that we all know what we're doing. All right, so let's launch into our questions. So
Yep.
what have you learned about the practice of assessment in your teaching subject? And can you include a brief definition and example of the different strategies of assessment?
Yep. So I'll just start by my experience. I only did one placement for 2 weeks in my first year. I was 19, it was 2023. It was at Stand Gardens. So I did about 1 week of teaching. And then lately, I've started casual work at Mount Druitt. So I've done a
Mhm.
little bit of casual work in HSIE classes. And next year, I will be a 7 to 10 HSIE teacher predominantly.
Oh, good
Um,
on you.
I've mostly been oriented to English, but I've recently started to develop HSIE teaching levels. But so I'll start with we have informal, so that's in class, day-to-day sort of basis,
Mhm.
not graded. You usually have to specify that to students, but sometimes you might not because they might not take it as seriously. Formal, so yes, that's generally your summative tasks, snap plans, and unit um, outlines. Diagnostic, so you just want to check on the student's understandings. Formative, that's assessment for learning, I'm quite sure. So it's
Yes,
usually involves feedback is the key part. So this
yes,
is where you're going. This is the gap to where you need to go, and then more feedback on that. But there's another question on that. I only have 2 minutes, so
yes.
more on that later. Summative, so again, usually like NAT plan, but you can still do it informally. So I have some examples here. Diagnostics. A recent discovery I made was KWL charts. I adapted it into an exit
Mhm.
ticket. It's like,
Yeah.
what is one thing I learned about this lesson? What is one thing I'm still not sure about? Which is more of a sort of informal diagnostic self-assessment.
Yes, that's
Um,
right.
but I still could argue that that's formative because I turned it into like an FAQ. I answered their questions and gave it to them the next class, which was an interesting engagement and also fed into
Mhm.
this paragraph activity. Formal, so yeah, a formal diagnostic test would probably be like ESL scales testing. So like sort of, or like a selective school test. That's probably more of the common diagnostic sort of formal from my knowledge. These are still applicable to history in general. ESL scale testing is probably not so much for history, but you might want to look towards more like, okay, do they know source analysis? Do they know contextualization, corroboration, that sort of discipline specific terminology, especially where they're at? Formative testing. So yes, that's like your ongoing assessments. You have formal historical investigations. So like you might submit a brief, then you submit a proposal, like for what you want to study. You get feedback iteratively, then you put your draft in, and then you put in your like final response. And then what are those? Sorry, I just disconnected my headphones through
That's
yesterday.
all right.
So yeah, a historical investigation is probably more a formative historical task. But you also have informal ones, online quizzes, self-assessments, peer marking. Those are still fairly standard. I do like the idea of using combat scaffolds and sort of like elaborative interrogation. I'm seeing how
Mm.
they go with that. Summative ones, so yeah, usually HSC or NAT plan, more HSC, I would say, for a high school context. Informal, like a class quiz at the end of the unit. One of the things that I would just like to note, I know I only have 2 minutes, so it's like two things for ESL if we're doing the scales. Beginner to consolidating is very diverse. The ESL scales have oral, reading, responding, and writing, so the way
Yes,
that
I
it looks,
do.
it's very different. So you even just verbal, informal class, think, pair, share,
Absolutely.
visible thing routines, those are really important as well. But also the design of your questions is really vital. So in EDST 4200 and in DeVries's article, they pretty much mention the same thing. Are you measuring, is it valid? Are you measuring accurately what you want to measure? Or is the question too hard and it's like a reading comprehension question? They
Mm.
presented this example of like a maths question in the year three NAP plan, and the students just, they're too busy trying to understand the question
Mhm.
that they don't even do the maths. So you need to make sure, especially for ELD, that your questions are concise, they're simple, they're accurate, and measure what you actually want to look at. For historical
Absolutely.
history, it's usually corroborate the source, contextualize the source, identify the significance of the source as a lens to a historian, not just what it is saying
Mm.
about like a narrative. And
Mm.
a lot of students don't look at the lens of the usefulness to a
No.
historian. They
Mm.
rather just look towards like a general narrative idea. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I think I'll stop there because yeah, I don't want
Yeah.
to take too
Oh,
long.
well, you've outlined that well. But that's quite true. They get stuck. They don't look at it in as a historian, do they? They're sort of looking at it as a paragraph that they might read, just for the sake of reading it, and they don't have that specific focus. Okay, so let's move to question two. So, how did you provide constructive and actionable feedback to students during one of your PECS placements?
So I don't have enough time to go on Zoom and self-regulated cycle, so I'm just going to go on
Right.
Hattie and Timperley, but they are based in that sort of
Yes.
self-regulation thing.
Yes, they are.
Hattie and Timperley is amazing. They've been cited in so many articles that I've read, and they've really sort of drilled that into me. But their idea is like feed forward advice. So again, there's a gap between where you're at and where you're going. They offer three questions: Where am I? How am I going? What are the next steps? And it
Yes.
isn't just like strategy. Strategy is the main thing, but there is goal expectations, there is motivation, and there is effort and things like that, which are more broad. And I won't know too much, but for Mount Druitt, the school has a lot of different differentiation needs.
Mhm.
I think that's a really important thing, insightful for me going on as a professional teacher. But because it asked me to specifically a PECS placement, so we were doing source analysis about Japanese women in World War II. It was propaganda, mostly visual propaganda, showing what they were like. A lot of students were familiar with the general context of women in the
Mhm.
50s, in like that sort of traditional notion of it, but not so much with Japan
Yes.
specifically. Um, so some of the feedbacks I had was so good ideas and context, but the explain and example is unstructured. So the TIL
Mhm.
structure that they employed, they would the paraphrasing wasn't the best, and they'd sometimes repeat it across times. Context of a source, quote or description. Oh yeah, so this feedback one, two, three is just like structure it better. So it's like
Yes.
I find a lot of kids come out of U10 into the senior level. They're still used to TEAL, which is good, but history is different. Like
Yes.
English, biology, history, you have to differentiate all of them. So I want to give them a structure and sentence starters that align with that. What is the context of the source? What is the quote or the description of the source, your paraphrasing
Mhm.
thing?
Mhm.
And then number three, so useful to women in World War II. Why is this useful to a historian rather than how does this help me to construct some sort of
Yes.
narrative? Because that's just more context.
Mhm.
I usually try and offer sentence starters, or I might write a whole sentence. That way they have a concrete idea of
Yep.
what that looks like.
Mhm.
And it usually ties back to like combat scaffolds or some sort of source
Yes.
analysis scaffold anyway. It's
Yes.
actionable. Yeah, it's more specified structure, specific quotes. For ELD, syntax, um, some students that might have a very good, so BICS, like they can talk to you about
Mhm.
things very
Mhm.
well. The syntax isn't always very good. They
Yeah,
might
that's
repeat
right.
things. So yeah, that structure, just really honing in that structure and synthesize is really good for them. Um,
Absolutely. The written word is very different to the spoken word, let alone in the context of history. Absolutely.
yeah.
Mm.
The last thing I have, so just for revisiting, this comes up in the other ones, but like thinking routines.
Mm.
Honestly, I think I might just skip that. I think I might just note the word bank exemplars. I think that it's really important. That's more in the next question. I think I don't have enough time to get that
Okay. All
anyway.
right. Okay. Well, let's move on then to how did your analysis of student data from one assessment task during one of your placements inform your subsequent teaching practice?
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go through Stanhope because that's the only placement that I really did.
Mhm.
I'm going to ignore the other ones, though I would like to talk a little bit about Mount Druitt as well.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's the same sort of issue was that lessons weren't accessible, desirable difficulty wasn't maintained for a diverse number of reasons. Some kids have ADHD, they struggle with that. Some kids have dyslexia. Some kids just don't find it the most exciting. Some kids are
Mhm.
engaged and they work hard, but they feel they're not being challenged enough. So there's a lot of like different levels of withdrawal. In the middle level, it was generally a good understanding of the history. They like the narrative part of it, and that really hooks
Yeah.
them into choosing modern history for year 11 and 12. But when it comes to like source analysis and the more specific disciplinarian aspects of it, that kind of, I guess they find it more boring.
Mm.
Even as a teacher, I guess I struggle with. So the ways that I usually would go through like write appeal, peer mark, rewrite. It's a lot of writing heavy, and it has to be for stage
Yes,
six
it does.
especially. But if you consider alternative modes, then that are still oriented to writing, then that's another way to sort of consider it. So like if you're looking at source analysis as, okay, we're building the field of knowledge, but we also want to build our knowledge of contextualization. That's the step before when you finally get to historical argumentation or lenses, but you can still have an idea of how that's diverse. So alternative modes like getting them to write about a newspaper or a letter, or but adjusting the pill to that new format. So you'll have to make new resources that adjust to that to sort of translates,
Mm.
or at least getting them to fill out like a combat scaffold, which is like context, origin, motive,
Yes.
bias, those sorts of things, and then getting them like that same planning before they write. So at least that way, then it sort of continues onwards.
Yes.
Build analysis skills, formal expression. Yep, so those are fun and they have alternative modes. On slide two, though, I did also write about, so questions like how do you change your subsequent teaching practice? You can't give an ELD student a paragraph and expect them to understand it. You need to
No.
give them a close passage. That way they understand the structure more, they know what words work. Even if it's like an emerging and developing, they don't always tell the difference between like what's the past tense of that? Like, or the past tense of be. There is no past tense word of be. There's no bead. It's like was. So even for like those emerging and beginner students, like you really need to have close
Mm.
passages or have sort of more differentiation there. They might be more advanced in stage six, but like even for where I'm going to teach 7 to 10, that's more useful. Checklists and peer markings are good, but you have to make sure your checklists are good and they go back to that structure. And you should sort of personalize it a bit. So yeah, I don't have so much time, but it's like I like that example of feedback I gave you, like 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
That's more
Yeah.
concise
Yes,
than
it
maybe
is.
saying like a proper full formal one.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of differentiation for it, but alternative modes make it more fun, more engaging, even in a very much so for the stage 4 and 5 context, but it can still work for
Absolutely.
stage 6 context so long as you maintain planning. When you get to
Absolutely.
augmentation, less so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's move on to question 4. So, how could a summative assessment task be differentiated to suit the culturally and linguistically diverse learners in the fictional stage 6 class?
Yep, so I wrote the main idea is differentiate access, not
Mm.
outcome. If you change the
Mm.
outcome, like, it's not a reasonable adjustment. Students will struggle because of cultural capital and
Yeah.
extraneous load, especially in ELD schools. It's the same thing I wrote to mention EDST4200 again. That's just the
Mm.
idea of validity and
Yeah.
accuracy. Are we measuring
Mm.
history or are we measuring reading comprehension, for instance?
Yes.
I have a specific example here. So the ESL scale. Yeah, so I made this specific to a developing ELD student
Mm.
because it's kind of in the middle between like developing to
Yes.
emerging. It's not too far apart, but of course it's very different between like reading and writing and all those things. It doesn't fully capture it, but I was just told to do it specifically. But yeah, so they're increasingly able to engage with mainstream curriculum. Cognitive language demands may still cause
Yes.
fatigue. So yeah, the Japan example, I've got some quotes from the syllabus here. A lot of it in general, I don't have time to get through the whole syllabus, but it talks about the
Mm.
impact of the war, civilian life, women,
Mm.
different sort of
Mm.
domains.
Mm.
Also a lot about imperialism. So they have a little bit of looks at like the Indochina conflict or like Korea. We looked at like comfort women in Korea. It was a pretty
Yeah.
distressing lesson. So it's pretty broad. So what that really ties back into though is this idea of contextualization. Get the disciplinary lens right, and then that sort of will translate. Like it's process
Yes.
based. Get
Yes.
a I will do this, then this, then this, then this. Getting them to do steps rather than oh Japan in Thailand, Japan in Philippines. Get it
Mm.
away from content and more to the process. That's
Yes.
where your focus is on, and your questions should really be to the to the that process.
Mm.
So some of the ways that I would have done that. So I've mentioned Hughenden, Rushton, and Rossbridge. They have this idea of contextualization.
Yes.
And Hover says to use evidence from source to answer. Yeah, so just to summarize that, the lens idea comes back again. Um, Sometimes we give students like a blurb paragraph, read through this. This is to help you understand how historians sort of come about it, and then they go straight to it. For an ELD student, you're just holding them back. Maybe you give them a visual prompt instead, or again, you just give them a concise, simple question to do with the lens. You might even have to prescribe them a lens. How how is account for the impact of war in Japanese occupied societies, um, and like to a historian studying like I don't know, Japanese war crimes or the economy
Mm.
or some sort of control, and make it more specific. You're not changing the outcome. You're not like stopping
No,
them from. It's just about the access. Students will have more extraneous load. Regular students will have more extraneous load trying to read or decipher prompts, but ELD students are already held back because they don't understand the language
that's
as well.
right.
You remove that
Mm.
extraneous load and you let them access it. Another one as well, so designed in differentiation message. So that's besides being concise questions. Maybe let them have the question in their own language, or just let them have visual sources. Visual
Mm.
sources are not an unfair or unreasonable adjustment because both students can use them. Statistics as well, it also embeds numeracy.
Mm.
Students are pretty good with numbers and with visuals. It's more easy to access, especially for developing, and even more so for emerging and beginner. Some other ones though, so like you might have alternative mode spoken exams or a scribe. Those are also pretty common. That's just like helping them to convey their knowledge and that sort of process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so my last one was syntax and sentence structure. I think it just depends on the issue. Like I know it's really specific, but it's like it just like you
It's
just don't want to
varied.
overwhelm them. It's
It
so varied.
varies student to student, and also whatever it is the content is that you're working towards achieving the skills for them to that they have to transfer that to their own knowledge after all, and you've got to inbuild the skills that they need to be able to show it in whatever way you can in order to meet their learning needs. All right, well, I think you've given some good examples there. So let's move to question 5. So what professional learning
Yep.
opportunities would you seek out to enhance your teaching effectiveness for that fictional class?
Yep. So this idea of reflective practitioner, the teaching and learning cycle and the inquiry cycles, pretty much the same sort of thing. It's like,
Mm.
what do I want my students to learn? What are my students struggling with? They're structured, they're circular sort of cycles of reflection that you can enter at any point to reflect on how am I going to improve my pedagogy. For ELD, so this stage 6 class, it's ELD and it's history, pedagogy itself. I had a few things to say. This document is an amazing starting point. Yeah, so this document here that I've hyperlinked, I
Mm.
say that I'm in pathway 2. It's a checklist, reflect on your knowledge of
Mhm.
differentiation.
Mhm.
I was in pathway 2. I have a good understanding of built-in differentiation or mid-level, but in terms of specialized, that's still something for me to work on.
Yes.
So I'm going to look at my PL sort of resources there. The source already recommends some. The Ponce High School, this was very interesting. Voice modulation. So
Oh,
it was
interesting.
about teachers have issues with speaking, like
Mm.
sore throats and stuff, but just to be specific to ELD. Um, water, water, sometimes we say that. No, we sort of stress the vowels. Like I might say paramatter, it's like paramatter. Like so a lot of
Mm.
students
Mm.
they struggle with that. Even students, even the people that are older and have worked here for a long time. I worked in this supermarket with a lot of recent immigrants, and they can't understand me very well. And they speak English like for 30 years. It's a second or third language, but they still just struggle just because of my
Mm.
accent. They'll
Mm.
understand someone with a clearer voice. So yeah, being really conscious of your voice and how you pronounce words.
Yes. And then there's the professional organisations like Peter that you've got there, and Nessa as well. They run some fantastic courses too, and also the school-based, the professional learning that is held in schools is often invaluable, just like the Ponds High School one that you've just talked about.
Yeah, the Ponce High School is 79% the votes. So it's
Mm,
almost
mm.
94, not quite, but yeah, very, very
It's still quite a number. It's a significant number.
yeah. So I did
Mm.
English on that placement, but it still kind of overlaps.
Well, of course
Um,
it does. Yeah, I think we actually have to leave that there now.
oh, okay. Could I
You
make a brief note on Mount Druitt?
yes, of course you can. Yeah.
So Mount Druitt, a lot of students are ELD, but like I had a kid say he was kicked out of the house and didn't have a lot of food, and another
Mm.
kid talk about like they're on their phone. She's like, "You can't call my parents because they don't care." So it's like even I don't know, just like differentiation for ELD goes to one level. Another level professional learning pathways, I really want to look in trauma-informed responses and
Mm,
how they overlap with ELD because
absolutely.
yeah, it's really something I picked up in the last week. And I'm just like, wow, I don't even know
Yeah,
how to
it does.
respond. My parents don't care.
It
Like,
definitely does overlap. And as we've got more and more students coming in from war-torn areas and places, the trauma that they've experienced, the clash in culture, even coming here, even if they're not from a trauma background, it's still a huge adjustment for them. So yes, I agree with you. I think that that'd be a fantastic area to upskill in.
yeah.
Mm. All right, well, all the best and enjoy the weekend.
All right. Thank you. Have a
Okay,
nice
you
weekend.
too.
So
Bye
I'm
now.
just gonna try and